Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we go back to October of 2018, where we tackle the most controversial subject in bike touring. Well, maybe not that. It's not bike helmets. No, it's not earbuds. It's how to deal with loose dogs on tour. On this very special edition of The Best of Pedalshift, I give my 2 cents on how to deal with those angry canines that are interrupting your pedaling. Hope you enjoy. This is an issue that I think I run into more often than I ever anticipated. I think that there are, at least in the States, and certainly in some countries globally, this is an issue that a lot of bicycle tourists will run into. It's a regional issue here in the United States. I know that, for instance, Kentucky, routes through Kentucky, especially on the Trans Am. It's one area. Down in the South, on the southern tier, some of the deep South states, I hear things in certain sections of Texas, Louisiana, I think Mississippi and Alabama to a certain extent as well. You're going to run into folks who don't have dogs on leashes. Their properties are in a rural place, so they let their dogs out. And some of these dogs don't care for bicyclists, or they're at least confused by bicyclists going by, and they'll run out and there's confrontations. So I think that this is an area that's about as controversial in my mind's eye as the whole helmet debate. Do you need to wear a helmet? Or the earbud debate. Is it cool to have earbuds in when you cycle? Because I think that there are a lot of folks who have a wide range of attitudes towards dogs generally. Then you add on all of this, and you add on the layer that it can sometimes be a safety issue. And I think you get a lot of folks who come to loggerheads on this issue. So I thought I would address this with just some ideas for you. Everyone comes at this from a different perspective. We work with, when I say we, Kimberly and I work with somebody for Kimberly's clothing business. She is deathly afraid of dogs. Literally, we can't even have the pugs, our dogs, the little teeny cartoon dogs around her. She's so afraid. So I know that there are a lot of folks who have a phobia, and I don't use that word to diminish it, but that are so deathly afraid of dogs that this is something that really it terrifies them. So then there are other folks like me who are used to dogs that are a little loud and barky and maybe even a little aggressive. And I sort of roll with the punches a little bit. And you may live somewhere between those poles, or you may be right on one of them. But I know that your perspective on dogs has a great deal to do with how you deal with them. Also your experience. Have you ever been attacked by a dog? Have you ever been injured? Have you ever been bitten? I can totally understand how that can create an issue for you as well. So generally speaking, take all of this with a grain of salt and put yourself along the spectrum here. There may be some ideas in here that will help you. There may be some points on this where you just flat out disagree and you are not necessarily in on how I would recommend that you deal with things. So I recognize that this, like so many things in bike touring, there are no necessarily bad answers. Although actually, I'm going to say a few things on some solutions that have been proffered out there on the internets that I just strongly disagree with. So we'll talk about this in a second. Anyways, I'm dancing around the issue. Let's jump into it. Dogs are acting on instinct. I recently did a week in Utah for our foundation. We do a lot of work with animal welfare and things like that with our foundation work. And I learned a lot about how dogs deal with things at this place. It's called Best Friends Animal Sanctuary. You may or may not have heard of it. There's a TV show, apparently. I'd never heard of this, but that followed, I believe, the Michael Vick dogs. He was involved, of course. Boy, I have to go into like tangent on tangent here. Michael Vick was an NFL football player who was involved in some dogfighting circles, and the dogs that he most famously was working with, is probably a bad way to put it, ended up at this animal sanctuary, and they were rough and they were gruff and they were aggressive, and these folks really helped them an awful lot. So they deal with dogs that are coming from some bad places. If you have bad instinct and bad training and things like that, you're going to end up with aggressive dogs. And I think that since dogs operate so much on instinct, how they behave and how they react is going to vary quite a bit. The vast majority of dogs are, as the saying goes, all bark and no bite. So they're more about warning and things like that. So when a dog comes up to you on a bicycle and is very aggressive, the majority of times that's as far as it's going to go. The majority of times. Now, that is not necessarily all the time, and how are you going to know? And that's kind of the crux of the issue here. If you are afraid of dogs, my words aren't going to overcome that. I've talked about my experience with a woman who we work with who literally can't even handle being around our cartoonish little pugs. I mean, I see it. I've experienced folks who just can't be around dogs and are just deathly afraid. We all have our own experiences with animals, so zero judgment on all of that. I wanted to try to have this episode, this section, be about some of the options that you have available to you when you are riding along and a dog is coming up on you and is being aggressive, and you are afraid of what's going to be happening. So here we go. Some options for you. Consider stopping. Many, many times dogs are chasing for the sake of chasing because that is a behavioral instinct that's in them, that is hardwired. It's in their DNA. It's just how it is. Consider stopping. Once they've caught up to you, a lot of these dogs are just going to stop. They're going to, because, okay, they've caught you. That's it. Game over. And then they turn around and go away. That's not going to always be the case. So I understand why you may be reticent to try to do that. If you do stop and you feel nervous, which is a totally understandable thing, one of the recommendations that I have read about, and I have actually practiced myself in some areas of West Virginia, at least one area I ride through, there is one dog and he is very aggressive and he always comes up on me. And once or twice I have stopped. I've hopped off the bike and I've kept the bike between myself and that dog. The dog doesn't go around. The dog doesn't try to attack. The dog does keep barking though and is on the other side of the bike. So I just continue rolling, walking, and then I hop on the bike and go. That's one of the things that you can kind of handle or deal with in handling it. It's probably not always the most preferable thing because of what's happening. You're stopping, you're staying in the situation, and I can understand why that might not necessarily feel real good. Although I'm here to say that sometimes that is all that you need to do. That's all that will happen. The dog will get bored, turn around and go back home. Especially if you hop off the bike and just keep walking away. Removing yourself from the scenario, of course, is the number one thing that you want to do. If you're wanting to do it a little bit faster, one of these other recommendations may come towards you. If stopping is either not possible or frankly you just don't want to, something I also understand. So let's talk about some things with we're going to split this up into a few different categories. The first category that I'm going to talk about is non-contact deterrent. So this is exactly what it sounds like. You are not touching the animal, but you are deterring this dog from coming any closer, or you're doing something to sort of put a break in between their activity and you. The first thing I will say is I'm going to back off from the mic. Loud yelling of negative word commands. I don't know how that'll come across. We'll see how that goes. But yes, literally yelling, no, stop, anything along those lines, but doing it forcefully and aggressively. Go into the closest thing you can do to a baritone on this. So everybody who's more of a high-pitched talker, bring your voice down and no, stop, loud. That's one effective way to do it. It doesn't always work, but it is something that's easy to do and is a non-contact way to deter the activity of the dog. Another thing that you could potentially do, and this of course would be something that you would have to purchase or be prepared for ahead of time, and that would be getting an ultra high frequency device like a dazer. This is a product that's commercially available out there. It's not the only one. You can look them up if you would like. And they're basically, the old dog whistle thing that we've always heard about back in the day. This is just basically something that's a high frequency thing. It's outside of the range of human hearing, but it's well within the range of dog hearing. I've heard some mixed success stories for people who have had something like that. Might be something for you to consider. Of course, this is something you only want to pull out when you are feeling in a bad place. Don't do it to dogs that aren't doing anything because it's mean and awful. It'd be like running up to somebody and yelling in their ear. It's kind of a dick move, so don't do that. But that's another possibility that is out there for you as well. So there you go on your non-contact deterrence. Frankly, that would be preferable because you're not touching, you're not getting involved with the animal whatsoever. Next up is non-lethal contact. This is when you are actually coming into some kind of contact with dogs that are bothering you. I think that these are the types of things that you'd want to be considering if maybe the non-contact deterrent stuff doesn't work, which is possible. It certainly happens. Number one, your water bottle, believe it or not. Now, for those of you who don't have squeeze water bottles, this is not going to be particularly effective, but if you've got a squeeze water bottle, pull it out and give it a squeeze towards the dog. Now, that is certainly not going to hurt them, but it will surprise them. And often I've heard great results out of something like that. The dogs will turn tail and go away because you've just surprised them so much. I think that that's a really good non-lethal contact option for you. And it's, of course, also going to be non-lethal and it won't harm them as well because a little bit of water is never going to hurt these dogs. Next up is pepper spray. And I say this with a bit of a caveat. Be mindful, this is not legal everywhere. There are some states, there are some municipalities, some localities, some counties that are very much against having pepper spray on you. You're going to be traveling. You may be going from a jurisdiction, maybe one that you live in where it's legal, and could be going to a place where it's not legal. So be mindful of all that. Now, if you are using this in a situation where you are really reasonably afraid for your life and there's somehow a cop around the corner and they come and pull you over, I'm here to tell you it would be incredibly unlikely that they would have a problem with you unless you were doing it in a way that was dangerous or not warranted, even in jurisdictions where that kind of a thing is illegal because you're using it in self-defense. I am not into pepper spray myself. People have used bear spray as well. That's just a higher volume and a higher concentration of the same stuff. It's basically the chemical that's in hot peppers. So it's not going to be lethal, but it could do, I mean, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt these animals. I personally don't like hurting animals, so I don't think I would ever use anything like that. But I also come from a perspective where I don't have as high fear of dogs, and I've had situations where I've run into stuff and I've used one of these other methods and it's worked out just fine for me. Your mileage may vary. Pepper spray, if that would make you feel better, if you've ever had to use it, if you know how to use it, no complaints for me. I think that that's something that's certainly available to you. It certainly works. I'm going to go into the things where, you know me, I never say you're doing it wrong. For most things, the vast majority of things in bicycle touring. I am going to sit here and get on my high horse and preach here on the following things you should never do when dealing with a loose dog on tour. The first thing I'm going to say don't ever do is don't hit or kick a dog unless you're legitimately being attacked. I have read, especially in some of the Reddit forums and some places where people will talk about, well, all it takes is a good swift kick and the dog goes away. And I see that as people doing it in the first instance, almost as if they're getting off a little bit on hurting a dog. Now, look, that's just a dick move. I don't think that you have the right to do that. I don't think that you should do that unless, and here's where my caveat is, if you are legitimately being attacked, if this dog is biting you, and that is your last resort, look, you got to defend yourself. I totally understand that. But bear in mind that, that's a risky thing too. Sometimes when dogs feel cornered, that may actually make things much, much worse. Also, you're throwing your balance off if you're still riding. There's a whole variety of reasons why this is a bad idea. Oh, by the way, also, sidebar here, let me put the lawyer hat on. Dogs are considered property in these here United States. If you're, I'm of course giving you United States law here. So if you are damaging the property of someone else, that actually can get you sued, believe it or not. I know, you feel like you're being attacked. It's crazy, but that's the case as well. I just think that doing physical harm to another animal is a bad idea. I think it's a particularly bad idea in all of this, with a caveat that if that's your last resort and that's all you can do to get away, then you got to do what you got to do. But please don't just kick a dog because you feel like you can. It's just not cool. Another thing that I read about, and I'm just befuddled, I'm bewildered, I don't understand. People have suggested using bee or wasp spray on dogs because it's set so that it can spray a distance and has a distance between you and the dogs. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever read before. Again, getting on my high horse here, that shit's poison. That's bad. That will do physical harm to these animals. That may just be barking at you. I'm reading from a lot of folks who feel like that because they're riding through and they think a dog is barking at them, they have the license to be able to spray poison on a dog. It's a dick move. Don't do it. It's not good. If you're carrying bee spray because you're afraid of bees and I don't know, you're like a I don't know. I don't know why you would be carrying bee poison on you, or bee spray or wasp poison or anything like that. Don't do it. Don't spray it at a dog. It's, again, a dick move. Please don't do it. It may be effective, but it's not cool. If you really do want to have a spray on you, go back to the pepper sprays. Go back to the things I talked about a little bit earlier. That is not poison. That will certainly have the same effectiveness. I think that a lot of folks who choose to do this do it because they're being cheap, because for some reason it's cheaper than the pepper spray. Don't do it. It's an awful idea. Here's another one that, again, I keep going up. Each of these things get worse and worse for me. So I'm just sort of like, why would people do this? Please don't use a firearm or another projectile weapon like a slingshot or something like that. I can't believe that people have talked about this. Some of you may choose to carry if it's legal to do so where you're riding, but follow your safety training and find an alternative to using your weapon whenever it's possible. It's legal potentially in a whole lot of different jurisdictions. You may, if you're properly licensed, you're properly trained, et cetera, et cetera. It's not illegal for you to carry that firearm when you're going out there, but it's probably a bad idea to fire said firearm in this scenario unless you are legitimately fearing for your life. I think that there are better alternatives to discharging your firearm in this scenario. I've gone through a few of them. Number one, consider stopping, putting the bike in between you and the dog if that is something that is helpful, and continue walking along until you get away from the dog. That is something that has worked for me a lot. Just continuing pedaling on will work a lot. There are many instances, and I've heard a lot of folks who say, I was cycling along and they took bites out of my panniers, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's possible, but you're getting through there, you're getting out of there. So pedaling through is another good option as well. I mean, that kind of is the first option, really, when all is said and done. But do consider stopping and putting the bike between you and the dog if that is something that you think will work out for you and you are feeling confident in that. If you don't like either of those two options and you need to create a deterrence in some other way, with a reminder and a caveat that doing many of these things means you're slowing down or stopping and you're still exposing yourself to the animal. Number one, the non-contact, I keep saying number ones. There's lots of number ones here. The other ones, non-contact deterrence, loud yelling of negative commands, high-frequency devices like a dazer or something else that's out there. And then going into non-lethal contact, like I talked about. We're talking your water bottles, going into pepper sprays as necessary. But the things I do not recommend, I can't get behind, don't like these things. Don't physically assault these animals unless you're in legitimate fear for your health or safety. Ditto with using a firearm. And don't use poison. Don't use bee or wasp spray. That's the one that's just a no-go. So in any event, I hope you don't run into situations like this. It's scary. It's not fun to be in a scenario where you're feeling afraid because you've got a dog that's coming after you, but they're operating a lot on instinct. Chances are you're going to get through there without a problem, that it's going to be at most a big scare and you're going to keep moving and everything's going to be cool. Every once in a while, you're going to get a situation where you're going to feel like you're legitimately being attacked. The dogs are getting at you. They're getting at your pannier. Utilize some of these non-lethal deterrents that I've talked about. They do work. They do have effectiveness to them. And very likely you're going to get out of there with just a good story to tell. And then maybe some ideas of your own on how to deal with loose dogs on tour. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.